Hey, what is up guys? And once again, welcome back to another Fallout 4 settlement walkthrough. Today we're going to be checking out a hunter's cabin up near Abernathy Farm. And although the building itself is rather small compared to something like a full-blown town, this one's actually got a really cool backstory behind it, which I think you'll catch on to rather quickly. But if not, I'll be sure to explain as much of it as I possibly can. That being said, the settlement is up for download now, so if you're interested, the link to the Nexus page will be down in the description. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get a closer look. Going into this settlement, I knew I had a few goals in mind, but overall, the main thing I really wanted to achieve was just giving Abernathy Farm quite a bit more life and quite a bit more history, because even though you have the whole thing with their daughter going on, aside from that, there really isn't that much else. So I chose to leave that part how it was, and then make a separate portion further down the hill that would hopefully become a great foundation for that better backstory that I was talking about. And really, I gotta say, I think it did just that. So if we start heading down the hill, you'll see that foundation I mentioned is indeed the hunter's cabin. And this also leads into my other main goal that I had while creating this settlement, and that was to give survival players a better starting base that they could really spend some time at and just come back to over their time as they did most of the quests that were available up north. So many years ago, before the events of Fallout 4, in a time when the Abernathy's children were still very young, a lone Brotherhood of Steel vertibird found itself flying through here during a rad storm just like this one to explore the Commonwealth for the first time to aid the Brotherhood of Steel. Now, unfortunately for them, their journey was cut a bit short, and they ended up crash landing at the base of this hill. At this point, although his luck hadn't been the best, and although he had sustained some pretty major injuries, the pilot was rescued by the Abernathys. Now his best friend and his gunner, on the other hand, was not so lucky. You see, after that night, he never did go back to the Brotherhood of Steel. Instead, he spent the rest of his days hunting, trying to provide for the people who had saved him. Obviously, with two young girls, the Abernathys were still a little weary, but they did allow the man to build his own cabin at the base of the hill. Now, I gotta say, this hunter's cabin has been a build I've wanted to do for a very long time now, but choosing a location for it has definitely been one of the toughest parts about this build. I mean, I really have tried just about everywhere, even some areas in Far Harbor, since, like I mentioned earlier, I did want this to be a great spot for a new survival playthrough. I thought in the end the Commonwealth was actually a much better fit. And as you can see down there, even though it is rather hazy, quite a few radstag actually come through this area rather often. So that alone is a pretty decent hunting ground, and if you end up killing all of them, there's always the rest of the surrounding woods as well, which I'm sure are full of all sorts of wildlife. Before we make our way inside the cabin, I did want to give you guys a bit of a closer look at the vertibird, and if we come over here, I think we'll get a much better look in terms of seeing how this thing crashed. So you'll notice all the trees through here have indeed been knocked over, and the propeller has actually been lodged into the trunk of this tree. So in hindsight, that's really what ended up stopping this thing. As you most likely saw earlier, the gunner's grave is just left of the vertibird, and him and the pilot really were quite the dynamic duo. In fact, they were so good that the rest of the Brotherhood named their vertibird the Butcher. Apart from that, on the other side of the vertibird, there's an area where you can cook some food, and this is also covered to really shelter it from any sort of rain or other harsh weather. Also, overall, even though the vertibird still held some maybe not so fond memories for the pilot, it sort of became his home away from home that he could come to after a long hunt, rather than just being inside of his cabin 24/7. So that being said, I really have done my best to decorate the entirety of this thing, and that also includes the interior as well. So this over time became a sort of getaway for the pilot where he could come into and just escape the harsh realities of the Commonwealth. So in the back corner we have a reading area for him, and on the right side there's also some toys that he brought in for the Abernathy girls, since I'm sure over time the Abernathys grew more and more trustworthy of him, and as a result he wanted to become, I guess, more and more part of the family. And part of that meant making friends with the daughters as well. The woods around the settlement are also full of Easter eggs, which I would love to show you right now, but I think it may actually be better if I let you find those on your own. So finally, let's go ahead and make our way inside the cabin. And even on the outside, I have tried to add quite a bit of detail that really fits in with the theme of this guy being a hunter. So we have cages, a tanning rack, and also a weapon workbench that he may have used to upgrade some of his hunting weapons. Oh yeah, and in case you guys were wondering, the body out front I threw up there because I thought, while this guy's out hunting, animals aren't the only thing he's got to run into. I'm sure he's had his fair share of encounters with raiders, so just to keep any of them from following him back here, I figured it would be best that he throw up one of their comrades, just to scare him off. But yeah, that aside, let's go ahead and check out the interior. Now, this I gotta say is easily one of my favorite interiors that I've done, at least in a very long time, just because it really is filled to the brim with all sorts of details. Now, we're not going to be going over every single one like we usually do in some of our smaller builds. I'll try and let you discover most of these on your own as well, but we will go over some of the major ones. So starting out on the left side, this would be the dining room. So that's where he'd spend most of his time eating his various meals throughout the day. Granted, he's not outside at the vertibird. And then moving right, this is the living room. Quite a bit of detail in here, but I think the standout decoration would definitely be the suit of power armor in the back. And since pilots don't usually wear those, I'm sure you've all come to the conclusion that that was his gunners. From this point, there's two options in terms of which way we could head. On the right we have his bedroom, and on the left would be the kitchen and bathroom, which I suppose we'll start with. On the right side we have most of his food and dinnerware, and then on the left would be more so random items that he uses for either crafting or cleaning. Moving on, behind this door is the bathroom, and in here lies one of my favorite details right next to the toilet, which is basically just the medical supplies, a bullet, and a piece of flesh. And I know that piece of flesh is gigantic, but I think it gets the point across that once upon a time this guy had to rip a bullet out of himself that I'm sure he got from a raider on one of his hunting expeditions. And I'm sure you can guess the alcohol up there was just to ease the pain. And also in here we've got some more cleaning supplies, a bathtub, and then the sink. Pretty much the basic necessities in any sort of bathroom. Surprisingly, the bedroom turned out to be one of the bigger areas inside this house. In fact, it was pretty much the same size as the living room. So to really break it down and try and make it a bit smaller and more manageable, I've also given it a closet in the back. Nothing really too fancy in here, but I think it does a great job at providing some storage. for any survival players out there, or even just vanilla players. And we've also got the pilot's flight suit in the back, and a map of the Commonwealth. Also, speaking of that pilot, one thing I really love about this window is that on a clear day, or as soon as the lightning flashes, you can see the Prydwen all the way from here. So I thought that went really well with the backstory behind this build. And I just find it crazy that sometimes even something as simple as a window can go as far as providing a lot of bad memories for someone like the pilot. Apart from the closet, I'd say there's actually 3 other separate areas in this room. Number 1 being the, game room to the right. And honestly, if you download the settlement, I would say feel free to change this up as much as you like. It doesn't have to stay what it is right now. I just kind of found it to be a nice spot where he could come and relax from time to time, maybe have a drink or read a comic book. On the left side, however, I think everything here really has a place in this cabin and really fits the overall theme, maybe quite a bit better than this area right here. So for instance, we have his office sort of in the middle, and then to the left of that is somewhat of an armory. And last but not least, in the back is the actual place where he sleeps. And as you can see, across this entire room, there's tons and tons of Brotherhood memorabilia, and I put all that there to show that just because he's not going back to the Brotherhood, it doesn't mean he's not supporting them still. The way I see it, they're always going to have a place in this guy's heart. It's just that after what he's been through, he can't go back. But anyways guys, that should do it for today, so hopefully you did enjoy the build, and if you liked it, I really do hope you'll choose to download it on the Nexus and try it out for yourselves. That being said, feel free to let me know what you thought down in the comments. Thanks again for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next one.